What if everything we've been taught about ancient civilizations is wrong? What if our ancestors weren't primitive cave dwellers slowly climbing the ladder of progress, but inheritors of technologies so advanced that we're only now beginning to understand them? Tonight, we're diving into the forbidden corners of archaeology, where artifacts whisper secrets that mainstream science refuses to hear. I'm about to show you evidence that will shatter everything you thought you knew about human history. We're talking about precision machining that predates the Industrial Revolution by millennia, electrical devices found in ancient tombs, and construction techniques that modern engineers admit they cannot replicate. This isn't just speculation or ancient astronaut theory. These are real objects, sitting in museums and private collections, defying every timeline we've been given. But here's what makes this investigation so compelling and so dangerous to established narratives. The evidence isn't hidden in some remote cave or buried beneath layers of sediment. It's been hiding in plain sight, dismissed by academics who can't explain it, categorized as ritual objects when their true purpose becomes uncomfortably obvious. What you're about to discover has been systematically ignored, suppressed, and explained away because it threatens the very foundation of how we understand human development. Over the next hour, I'm going to walk you through 7 categories of impossible artifacts, each one more mind-bending than the last. We'll examine precision-engineered stone vessels that shouldn't exist, explore electrical batteries that powered ancient devices, and investigate construction techniques that seem to bend the laws of physics. But more importantly, I'll show you why this evidence matters right now, in our time, and how understanding our true past might be the key to unlocking our future. The first category of impossible artifacts centers around something deceptively simple: stone vessels. Now, before you click away thinking this sounds boring, let me tell you what we're really dealing with. In the underground chambers beneath the step pyramid of Saqqara, archaeologists discovered over 40,000 stone vessels. Not pottery, not clay, stone. Granite, diorite, schist, some of the hardest materials on Earth. And they're not roughly hewn ceremonial bowls. They're precision-engineered containers, with walls so thin you can see light through them, perfectly balanced, with tolerances that would make a Swiss watchmaker weep. Dr. Ben van Kerkwijk, an expert in precision engineering, examined these vessels and made a startling discovery. Many of them exhibit perfect rotational symmetry. When placed on a precision measuring device, they show zero wobble, zero deviation. The walls maintain consistent thickness throughout, often measuring just millimeters. The handles, when present, are carved from the same piece of stone as the body, requiring the craftsman to somehow hollow out the interior through an opening smaller than the finished internal cavity. Think about that for a moment. How do you carve out the inside of a stone vessel through a hole smaller than the space you're trying to create? With copper tools and stone hammers, as mainstream archaeology suggests, the physics simply don't work. You'd need access to the interior space, rotating machinery for the perfect symmetry, and measuring devices capable of detecting variations smaller than the width of a human hair. But wait, it gets stranger. Some of these vessels have internal features, chambers within chambers, undercuts that would be impossible to create without modern machine tools. I'm talking about internal geometries that require computer-controlled multi-axis machinery to produce today. Yet we're told they were made by people who hadn't invented the potter's wheel. The official explanation falls apart under scrutiny. Archaeologists claim these were made by patient craftsmen using abrasive sand and copper tools, slowly grinding away material over months or years. But sand abrasion doesn't create the glass-smooth surfaces we observe. It doesn't produce the mathematical precision of the walls. And it certainly doesn't explain how they created those impossible internal geometries. Here's what really makes your skin crawl. When modern engineers attempt to recreate these vessels using traditional methods, they fail every time. Even with our understanding of ancient techniques, even with unlimited time and patience, the results look nothing like the originals. The precision simply cannot be achieved with the tools supposedly available to ancient craftsmen, yet thousands of these vessels exist. They're not rare curiosities or one-off flukes. They represent a manufacturing capability that suggests an entirely different level of technological sophistication than we've attributed to pre-dynastic Egypt. And that brings us to an uncomfortable question. If these people had access to precision machinery, what else were they capable of? The stone vessels are just the beginning, because when you start looking at ancient architecture through the lens of advanced technology, patterns emerge that are impossible to ignore. Take the Antikythera mechanism. Discovered in a Roman shipwreck off the Greek coast in 1901. For decades, it sat in museums, corroded and mysterious, dismissed as some kind of astrolabe or primitive clock. Then X-ray analysis revealed the truth. This device contains over 30 bronze gears, configured in a complex arrangement that tracks the movements of the sun, moon, and planets with extraordinary accuracy. It predicts eclipses, calculates the 4-year cycle of the Olympic Games, and displays the 19-year metonic cycle of lunar phases. The gear ratios are mathematically precise, the tooth counts calculated to astronomical specifications. This is analog computer technology from 2,000 years ago. The gear trains are so sophisticated that nothing comparable appears in the historical record until mechanical clocks emerged in medieval Europe more than 1,000 years later. The precision of the gear cutting, the complexity of the differential mechanisms, the astronomical accuracy of the calculations, it represents a level of technological achievement that mainstream archaeology insists was impossible for ancient civilizations. But here's the Antikythera mechanism wasn't part that should keep you awake at night. It's unique. References in ancient texts suggest similar devices existed throughout the classical world. Cicero mentions mechanical models of celestial movements. Archimedes is credited with creating bronze spheres that replicated planetary motions. What we've found may be just one surviving example of a lost tradition of precision engineering. The implications are staggering. If ancient Greeks possessed gear-cutting technology advanced enough to create the Antikythera mechanism, what other mechanical devices might they have built? What other technologies have been lost to time or dismissed by modern scholars who can't accept that our ancestors might have been more sophisticated than we imagined? This pattern repeats across cultures and continents. In Baghdad, archaeologists discovered what appears to be a galvanic cell, an electrical battery, dating to around 250 BCE. The Baghdad battery consists of a clay jar containing a copper cylinder and an iron rod sealed with asphalt. When filled with an electrolyte solution, it produces a measurable electrical current. Mainstream archaeology dismisses it as a storage vessel, despite the fact that identical configurations are used in modern battery construction. But here's what they can't explain. Residue analysis of similar jars found in the region shows evidence of electroplating. Thin layers of gold and silver applied to base metals with a precision that requires electrical current to achieve. We're not talking about simple gold leafing or mechanical plating techniques. This is electrochemical deposition, a process that wasn't officially invented until the 19th century. Yet archaeological evidence suggests it was being used in Mesopotamia over 2,000 years ago. The implications are profound. If ancient craftsmen had access to electrical current for plating metals, what other applications might they have discovered? The evidence keeps mounting. In Peru, the Nazca Lines stretch across the desert in patterns that can only be fully appreciated from the air. Mainstream archaeology suggests they were created for religious or astronomical purposes, using simple surveying techniques. But the precision of the lines, the mathematical relationships between the figures, the sheer scale of the project, it all suggests a level of planning and execution that requires aerial perspective. How do you create perfectly straight lines stretching for miles across varied terrain without the ability to see the overall pattern? How do you maintain mathematical proportions in figures hundreds of feet across? The conventional explanation involves teams of workers following carefully surveyed paths, but attempts to recreate the lines using proposed ancient techniques have never achieved the precision of the originals. Then there's the question of purpose. If these were religious or ceremonial sites, why create imagery that can only be properly viewed from an altitude of several hundred feet? It's as if the Nazca people were creating art for an audience in the sky. The mainstream explanation requires us to believe that ancient people spent generations creating massive ground drawings that they themselves could never properly see or appreciate. But perhaps the most unsettling evidence comes from the realm of megalithic construction. Around the world, ancient builders somehow moved and precisely placed stone blocks weighing hundreds of tons. At Baalbek in Lebanon, the foundation stones weigh over 800 tons each. At Saqqara in Peru, irregularly shaped blocks fit together with tolerances measured in fractions of millimeters. Modern construction equipment struggles with loads of this magnitude. Our largest mobile cranes top out around 1,200 tons of lifting capacity, and that's with steel construction, hydraulic systems, and computer-controlled precision. Yet ancient builders routinely worked with stones approaching these limits, often in remote locations, with no apparent access for modern-scale equipment. The precision of the stonework defies conventional explanation. At many sites, the joints between massive blocks are so tight that you can't slip a razor blade between them. The surfaces are perfectly flat, the angles mathematically precise. In some cases, the stones are cut with complex geometries, internal corners, curved surfaces, interlocking shapes that would challenge modern stone-cutting equipment. Mainstream archaeology attributes this precision to patient handwork with copper tools and stone hammers, but experimental archaeology tells a different story. When researchers attempt to recreate ancient stonework using proposed traditional methods, the results look nothing like the originals. The precision, the smoothness, the mathematical accuracy, it all points to mechanical assistance that supposedly didn't exist. The evidence is overwhelming, systematic, and global. From precision stone vessels in Egypt to complex mechanical computers in Greece, from electrical devices in Mesopotamia to impossible megalithic construction around the world, our ancestors left behind artifacts that challenge every assumption we've made about technological development. But here's the question that should haunt every thinking person. If this evidence is so compelling, why isn't it taught in schools? Why do mainstream archaeologists continue to dismiss these artifacts as curiosities, or explain them away with increasingly implausible conventional theories? What are they so afraid of? The answer might be more disturbing than the evidence itself, because accepting the reality of ancient advanced technology doesn't just rewrite history books. It fundamentally challenges our understanding of human progress, our assumptions about technological development, and our place in the grand timeline of civilization. What if we're not the pinnacle of human achievement, slowly climbing from primitive beginnings towards some technological singularity? What if we're actually rediscovering knowledge that was lost? What if our ancestors achieved things we're only now beginning to understand? And most importantly, what if the evidence of their achievements has been systematically suppressed because it threatens the very foundation of how we see ourselves? The suppression isn't accidental. It's systematic, institutional, and it runs deeper than most people realize. When archaeologists discover artifacts that don't fit the accepted timeline, they face a choice: challenge the entire academic framework they've built their careers on, or find ways to make the evidence disappear into the margins of acceptable discourse. Take the case of the Dropa stones, discovered in 1,938-inch, the mountains between China and Tibet. These disc-shaped objects, covered in tiny hieroglyphs, were initially dismissed as ceremonial items. But when researchers finally decoded portions of the text, the content was so controversial that the Chinese government confiscated the stones and banned further study. The decoded passages spoke of visitors from the stars, of crashed vessels, of beings stranded on Earth thousands of years ago. Whether you believe the translation or not, the reaction tells you everything. Rather than encouraging further investigation, rather than applying rigorous scientific analysis, the response was immediate suppression. The stones vanished into government vaults, the researchers were silenced, and the entire discovery was relegated to fringe theory status. This is the pattern that repeats whenever evidence challenges orthodoxy. But the suppression goes beyond individual artifacts. It's built into the very structure of archaeological education and funding. Graduate students learn quickly that certain questions don't get asked if you want to secure research grants. Museums curators understand that certain exhibits won't get approval from their boards. Publishers know that textbooks suggesting radical revisions to human history won't be adopted by school districts. The result is a feedback loop of intellectual conformity. Evidence that doesn't fit gets ignored. Researchers who ask uncomfortable questions get marginalized, and the official narrative becomes increasingly divorced from the physical reality sitting in museum storage rooms around the world. Consider the case of Dr. Kurt Schildmann, a German linguist who spent decades studying ancient scripts and symbols. His translations of pre-Sanskrit texts suggested technological knowledge that predated known civilizations by thousands of years. References to flying vehicles, advanced metallurgy, even what appeared to be atomic theory. But instead of engaging with his work, the academic community dismissed him as a fringe theorist. His research was never peer-reviewed, never seriously considered, never given the rigorous analysis it deserved. This isn't science. This is dogma protection, and it's happening in universities, museums, and research institutions worldwide. The mechanisms are subtle but effective. Funding gets redirected, papers get rejected, careers get quietly derailed. The message is clear: stay within acceptable parameters or find another profession. But here's what the suppressors don't understand. Truth has a way of surfacing, especially in our interconnected age. Independent researchers armed with modern analytical tools are re-examining old evidence and making new discoveries that bypass traditional gatekeepers entirely. 3D scanning reveals construction details that were invisible to previous generations. Chemical analysis uncovers metallurgical techniques that shouldn't exist. Astronomical software confirms alignments that ancient peoples supposedly couldn't have calculated. The evidence is becoming impossible to ignore, and the old explanations are crumbling under scrutiny. Which brings us to the most explosive category of forbidden artifacts, the ones that suggest our ancestors had mastery over forces we're only beginning to understand. In the Dendera temple complex in Egypt, carved into stone reliefs that are thousands of years old, we find depictions that look disturbingly like electrical devices. The famous Dendera light reliefs show figures holding what appear to be elongated bulbs, connected by cables to box-like objects that modern electrical engineers recognize as power sources. The proportions, the connections, even the supporting insulators, it all corresponds to electrical lighting technology. Egyptologists insist these are religious symbols, representations of mythological serpents or divine emanations. But when electrical engineers examine the same reliefs, they see technical diagrams. The serpents follow the exact path that electrical current would take through a Crookes tube. The cables connect to what appear to be generators or transformers. Even the figures holding the devices are positioned exactly as you'd expect for operators managing high-voltage equipment. The controversy reached a peak when engineers at a German university actually built working replicas based on the Dendera reliefs. Using only materials and techniques available to ancient Egyptians, they created functional electrical lighting systems. The devices worked. They produced light using principles that weren't officially discovered until the 19th century, based on diagrams carved into temple walls 4,000 years ago. But mainstream Egyptology refuses to engage with these demonstrations. Instead of investigating the implications, instead of asking how ancient temple builders might have possessed electrical knowledge, The response has been to dismiss the engineers as misguided enthusiasts. The official position remains unchanged. These are religious symbols, nothing more. This pattern of denial becomes even more disturbing when you examine the global evidence for ancient electrical technology. In Iraq, the Baghdad batteries aren't isolated discoveries. Similar electrochemical cells have been found throughout Mesopotamia, often in association with metalworking sites. The evidence for ancient electroplating is overwhelming: thin, uniform layers of precious metals applied to base materials with a precision that requires electrical current. Yet archaeology textbooks continue to claim that electricity wasn't harnessed until Franklin's kite experiments in the 18th century. The physical evidence sitting in museums worldwide tells a different story, but that evidence has been systematically categorized as ritual objects or unexplained curiosities rather than technological artifacts. The suppression extends to megalithic sites, where evidence of advanced construction techniques is hiding in plain sight. At Pumapunku in Bolivia, researchers have identified tool marks on stone blocks that correspond to modern machining operations. Perfectly straight cuts, uniform depths, corner radiuses that match industrial specifications. The precision is so exact that archaeologist Brian Forster brought stone samples to machine shops where experienced machinists confirmed that the cuts could only have been made with diamond-tipped tools operating at high rotational speeds. But rather than investigating how ancient builders might have achieved such precision, rather than questioning our assumptions about pre-Columbian technology, the archaeological establishment has simply ignored the evidence. The tool marks are dismissed as natural weathering patterns, despite the fact that weathering doesn't create perfectly straight lines or maintain uniform depths across different stone compositions. The most unsettling suppression involves evidence that challenges our understanding of human antiquity itself. Artifacts and structures that suggest advanced civilizations existed far earlier than mainstream chronology allows. The underwater ruins off the coast of Japan, precisely cut stone structures submerged since the end of the last ice age. The Bosnian pyramid complex, with its acoustic properties and electromagnetic anomalies that suggest technological purposes beyond simple burial monuments. These discoveries should be front-page news, the focus of intensive international research efforts. Instead, they're marginalized, underfunded, and excluded from serious academic discourse. The message is clear: evidence that doesn't fit the approved timeline will not be acknowledged, regardless of its scientific merit. But perhaps the most telling aspect of this suppression is how it mirrors historical patterns of scientific resistance. Galileo was condemned for suggesting Earth orbited the Sun. Wegener was ridiculed for proposing continental drift. Semmelweis was ostracized for advocating hand-washing in hospitals. In each case, the evidence was clear, but it challenged established doctrine. The institutional response wasn't investigation, it was persecution. Today's archaeological orthodoxy exhibits the same defensive behavior. When faced with evidence that challenges core assumptions about human development, the response isn't curiosity or rigorous analysis. It's dismissal, marginalization, and professional punishment for those who dare to investigate further. The question isn't whether ancient advanced technology existed. The evidence is overwhelming. The question is why modern institutions are so invested in denying that evidence. What are they protecting? What worldview are they so desperate to preserve that they'll ignore physical artifacts, suppress research, and destroy careers to maintain it? The answer might be more fundamental than academic politics or career preservation, because accepting the reality of ancient advanced technology doesn't just rewrite history, it revolutionizes our understanding of human potential itself. It suggests that technological development isn't linear, that civilizations can rise and fall, that knowledge can be lost and rediscovered. It implies that we might not be the first advanced civilization on Earth, and we certainly won't be the last. That's a humbling realization for a species that likes to think of itself as the pinnacle of evolution, the masters of the natural world, the first intelligent beings to harness the forces of nature. The evidence whispers a different story, that intelligence, technology, and civilization have emerged before, achieved remarkable heights, and then vanished into the mists of time, leaving only scattered artifacts to hint at their former glory. And if that's true, if advanced civilizations have risen and fallen in Earth's past, then what does that say about our current trajectory? What lessons might we learn from studying how our predecessors achieved technological mastery and what ultimately led to their disappearance? These aren't just academic questions, they're survival questions, and the institutions that should be helping us find answers are instead working overtime to ensure those questions never get asked. The suppression runs so deep that it's created an entire shadow archaeology, a parallel world of researchers, engineers, and investigators who've been forced to work outside traditional institutions because their findings threaten the established narrative. These aren't fringe conspiracy theorists or ancient astronaut enthusiasts. These are credentialed scientists, experienced engineers, and skilled craftsmen who've examined the evidence with fresh eyes and reached conclusions that mainstream academia refuses to consider. Dr. Christopher Dunn, a precision machinist with decades of experience in aerospace manufacturing, has spent years analyzing ancient Egyptian stonework through the lens of modern engineering principles. His findings are revolutionary and deeply unsettling. The granite coffer in the Great Pyramid's King's Chamber shows clear evidence of machine tooling. The internal corners have specific radius measurements that correspond to modern cutting tools. The surface finish exhibits parallel striations, consistent with high-speed machining operations. When Dunn measured the coffer using precision instruments, he discovered tolerances that rival modern manufacturing standards. We're talking about variations measured in thousandths of an inch across a granite box weighing several tons. The walls are perfectly parallel, the corners are precisely square, and the internal dimensions show mathematical relationships that suggest computer-aided design. But here's what makes your blood run cold. When Dunn presented his findings to Egyptologists, showing them clear photographic evidence of machine tool marks on ancient granite, the response wasn't scientific curiosity, it was hostility. Rather than examining the evidence, rather than bringing in other engineers to verify the analysis, the academic establishment simply dismissed Dunn as an outsider who didn't understand archaeological methodology. This isn't how science is supposed to work. When you discover evidence that challenges existing theories, you investigate further, you bring in experts from relevant fields. You apply rigorous analysis to determine what the evidence actually shows. You don't attack the messenger and ignore the message. The pattern repeats with mechanical engineer Robert Schoch, whose geological analysis of the Sphinx suggests water erosion patterns that would require thousands of years of rainfall in a region that's been arid for millennia. The implications are staggering. If Schoch is correct, the Sphinx is far older than conventional archaeology claims, possibly predating known Egyptian civilization by thousands of years. But instead of welcoming geological expertise to help solve one of archaeology's greatest mysteries, the response from Egyptologists has been uniformly hostile. Schoch's credentials are impeccable, his methodology is sound, his evidence is compelling, yet he's been systematically excluded from conferences, denied access to sites, and dismissed as a maverick whose geological training somehow disqualifies him from commenting on geological features. This is intellectual terrorism, pure and simple. It's the deliberate suppression of scientific inquiry through professional intimidation. And it's happening because Schoch's evidence threatens the carefully constructed timeline that underpins modern archaeology's understanding of human development. The underground resistance includes computer scientists who've analysed the mathematical properties of ancient sites and found evidence of advanced geometric knowledge. Astronomers who've discovered stellar alignments in megalithic structures that require precise calculation of celestial mechanics. Metallurgists who've examined ancient alloys and found compositions that shouldn't be possible with primitive smelting techniques. Each researcher, working in isolation, sharing findings through informal networks, publishing in alternative journals, presenting at conferences that mainstream academia pretends don't exist. They're forced to operate like dissidents in an authoritarian regime, carefully protecting their evidence while building a compelling case that challenges every assumption we've been taught about our ancestors. The evidence they're uncovering points to a shocking conclusion. Human civilization has experienced multiple cycles of advancement and collapse. The artifacts we're examining aren't anomalies or one-off achievements by particularly clever ancient peoples. They're remnants of technological traditions that once spanned continents and persisted for millennia before being lost to cataclysm, war, or societal collapse. Consider the global distribution of precision stonework. From the Cyclopean walls of Sacsayhuaman in Peru to the megalithic temples of Malta, from the trilithons of Stonehenge to the foundation stones of Baalbek, we find the same impossible precision, the same massive scale, the same evidence of advanced construction techniques. These aren't isolated achievements by unrelated cultures. They represent a shared technological tradition that once connected civilizations across vast distances. The mathematical relationships encoded in these structures suggest a sophisticated understanding of geometry, astronomy, and engineering principles. The Great Pyramid's dimensions encode the mathematical constant pi and the golden ratio. The stone circles of Britain align with stellar positions that require centuries of astronomical observation to calculate. The temples of Angkor Wat replicate the constellation Draco with architectural precision that demands both advanced surveying techniques and deep astronomical knowledge. This isn't coincidence. It's evidence of a lost scientific tradition that achieved remarkable sophistication before disappearing from the historical record. And the more evidence we uncover, the more obvious it becomes that this tradition included technologies we're only now beginning to rediscover. The electrical evidence is particularly compelling because it appears in multiple forms across different cultures and time periods. The Dendera reliefs in Egypt, the Baghdad batteries in Mesopotamia, the electroplated artifacts found throughout the ancient world, they all point to a working knowledge of electrical principles that mainstream science claims wasn't developed until the modern era. But the evidence goes beyond simple electrical devices. Recent analysis of ancient sites has revealed electromagnetic anomalies that suggest more sophisticated applications of electrical technology. Ground-penetrating radar at megalithic sites has detected geometric patterns in the subsurface that correspond to electrical grid layouts. Magnetometer readings show organized magnetic field variations that appear to be artificially created. At the hypogeum of Hal Saflieni in Malta, acoustic researchers have discovered that the underground chambers exhibit resonant frequencies that match human brainwave patterns. When sounds are produced at specific pitches within the complex, the stone walls begin to vibrate in ways that induce altered states of consciousness in visitors. This isn't accidental. The chambers were precisely engineered to produce these effects. The implications are staggering. If ancient builders possessed knowledge of acoustics, advanced enough to engineer consciousness-altering environments, what other applications of sound and vibration might they have mastered? The precision stone cutting we observe at megalithic sites could have been achieved through ultrasonic technology. The massive stones could have been moved using acoustic levitation techniques. These aren't wild speculations. Modern researchers have demonstrated that focused sound waves can indeed cut stone and levitate objects. The technology exists today, though we're only beginning to understand its full potential. What if our ancestors had already mastered these principles thousands of years ago? The evidence suggests they had. Tibetan monks still maintain traditions of using sound to manipulate physical matter. Aboriginal Australians speak of ancestors who could sing stones into place. Ancient Indian texts describe vimanas, flying vehicles powered by sound and mercury-based propulsion systems. These aren't primitive myths about magical powers. They're technical descriptions of technologies that we're finally sophisticated enough to recognize. But acknowledging this evidence requires us to abandon comfortable assumptions about linear technological progress. It forces us to confront the possibility that human civilization has risen to great heights before, only to collapse and lose its accumulated knowledge. It suggests that we might be rediscovering principles that were once common knowledge, struggling to achieve what our ancestors had already mastered. This is why the suppression is so fierce. Because accepting the reality of ancient advanced technology doesn't just rewrite textbooks, it fundamentally alters our understanding of human potential and our place in the cosmic timeline. It suggests that consciousness, intelligence, and technological mastery have emerged multiple times throughout Earth's history, achieved remarkable heights, and then vanished, leaving only scattered artifacts to hint at their former glory. The question that should haunt us is simple. If advanced civilizations have risen and fallen before, what caused their collapse? What lessons can we learn from their achievements and their failures? What knowledge did they possess that might help us avoid the same fate? These are the questions that the academic establishment refuses to ask, the investigations they actively suppress, the evidence they systematically ignore. Because confronting these questions requires intellectual humility, the admission that we might not be the first intelligent species to achieve technological mastery, and we certainly won't be the last. The artifacts are speaking to us across the millennia, whispering secrets about human potential that our institutions are desperate to silence. But the truth has a way of emerging, especially when it's carved in stone, embedded in metal, and scattered across the globe in forms too numerous and too compelling to ignore forever. What we're witnessing isn't just archaeological revisionism, it's the emergence of a new understanding of human history that's simultaneously humbling and inspiring. Humbling because it suggests we're not as unique as we'd like to believe. Inspiring because it reveals that consciousness and intelligence are far more resilient and creative than we'd ever imagined. The forbidden history is becoming impossible to suppress. The evidence is too widespread, too compelling, too technically sophisticated to dismiss as primitive mythology or ritual symbolism. We're looking at proof that our ancestors achieved technological mastery that rivals, and in some cases, exceeds our current capabilities. And that realization changes everything. Because if they could do it, if they could rise to such heights with the consciousness and intelligence that we share, then what might we be capable of? What technologies might we rediscover? What knowledge might we reclaim? What heights might we reach? If we stop limiting ourselves with false assumptions about what's possible, the artifacts aren't just evidence of ancient achievement. They're blueprints for human potential, roadmaps to capabilities we've forgotten we possess. The precision engineering, the electrical mastery, the acoustic manipulation, the consciousness-altering technologies, it's all there, waiting for minds sophisticated enough to recognize it for what it truly represents. We stand at a threshold. Behind us lies a false history of primitive ancestors slowly climbing towards civilization. Ahead lies the recognition that intelligence, consciousness, and technological mastery have been part of the human story far longer than we've been willing to admit. The choice is ours. Continue accepting comfortable lies, or embrace the revolutionary truth that our ancestors have left scattered across the globe in forms too compelling to ignore. The forbidden history isn't forbidden because it's false, it's forbidden because it's true. And that truth is about to change everything we thought we knew about ourselves, our past, and our unlimited potential for the future. The evidence for ancient advanced acoustics extends far beyond the Hypogeum of Malta. At the Great Pyramid of Giza, researchers have discovered that the internal chambers resonate at precisely 110 Hz, a frequency that modern neuroscience has shown triggers altered states of consciousness in the human brain. The King's Chamber, when acoustically tested, reveals harmonic properties that suggest it was designed as a massive resonance chamber, not a burial vault. French acoustician Philippe Guillemot spent months analyzing the pyramid's internal geometry and made a discovery that sent shockwaves through both the archaeological and engineering communities. The angles of the passages, the dimensions of the chambers, the placement of the so-called air shafts, they all correspond to acoustic principles that weren't officially understood until the 20th century. The entire structure functions as a precision-engineered sound device, capable of amplifying and focusing acoustic energy in ways that modern concert halls can barely achieve. But here's what makes your spine tingle. When Guillemot used computer modeling to predict the pyramid's acoustic behavior, the results matched exactly with measurements taken inside the actual structure. The ancient builders had achieved acoustic engineering that required sophisticated mathematical calculations and a deep understanding of how sound waves interact with stone geometry. This wasn't trial and error construction. This was precision engineering based on advanced scientific principles. The implications ripple outward when you realize that acoustic anomalies appear at megalithic sites worldwide. Newgrange in Ireland, built supposedly by Neolithic farmers, exhibits the same resonant properties at 110 Hz. The stone circles of Avebury in England show harmonic relationships between standing stones that create complex interference patterns when sounds are produced at specific frequencies. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, recently dated to over 11,000 years old, contains acoustic chambers that focus sound with laser-like precision. This isn't coincidence. It's evidence of a global acoustic tradition that understood the relationship between sound, consciousness, and stone construction. Ancient builders weren't just creating monuments, they were engineering consciousness-altering environments, using principles that we're only now beginning to rediscover through neuroscience research. Dr. Ian Cook, a neurologist at UCLA, has studied the effects of infrasound on human consciousness and made disturbing discoveries. Exposure to specific low-frequency vibrations can induce everything from mild euphoria to profound altered states, from enhanced creativity to what subjects describe as spiritual experiences. The frequencies that produce these effects, they match exactly with the resonant frequencies found in ancient megalithic structures worldwide. The ancient builders knew something about consciousness that we've forgotten. They understood that specific acoustic environments could alter human brain states, enhance perception, perhaps even facilitate communication with what? Other dimensions of reality? Higher states of consciousness? The evidence suggests they were using sound technology to access realms of experience that modern materialistic science insists don't exist. But the acoustic evidence is just one thread in a tapestry of advanced knowledge that spans multiple scientific disciplines. When you examine ancient metallurgy through the lens of modern materials science, patterns emerge that challenge every assumption about technological development. The Delhi iron pillar in India has stood for over 1,600 years without rusting, not corroding, not degrading, standing in monsoon rains and scorching heat, maintaining its structural integrity in ways that modern steel cannot match. When metallurgists analyzed its composition, they discovered an iron-phosphorus alloy that creates a protective coating preventing oxidation. The technique for creating this alloy was supposedly unknown until the 20th century, yet there it stands, a testament to metallurgical knowledge that we're still struggling to fully understand. In Peru, researchers have found evidence of platinum working at Chavin de Huantar, a site over 3,000 years old. Platinum melts at 1,768 degrees Celsius, nearly 3,215 degrees Fahrenheit. Achieving these temperatures requires advanced furnace technology and sophisticated understanding of metallurgical processes. Yet mainstream archaeology insists that ancient Peruvians were working with simple copper and bronze tools. The evidence for advanced metallurgy appears globally. In China, archaeologists have discovered chrome-plated bronze weapons in the terracotta army, dating to the 3rd century BCE. Chrome plating wasn't officially invented until 1848. The weapons show no signs of corrosion, after over 2,000 years buried in soil that should have destroyed them within decades. In Egypt, the bent pyramid of Dahshur contains metallic objects that have puzzled researchers for decades. Chemical analysis reveals alloys that shouldn't be possible with ancient smelting techniques, precise ratios of copper, tin, and trace elements that require temperature control and atmospheric management beyond the capabilities of primitive forges. But perhaps the most unsettling metallurgical evidence comes from sites where we find what can only be described as industrial-scale production. The copper mines of the Great Lakes region show evidence of extraction operations that removed an estimated 500,000 tons of copper over several thousand years. This wasn't small-scale mining by primitive peoples. This was industrial extraction that required advanced engineering, organized labor, and sophisticated transportation networks. Where did all that copper go? The official archaeological position is that local Native American peoples used it for tools and ornaments, but 500,000 tons of copper? That's enough material to supply the entire Bronze Age Mediterranean, yet very little of it appears in the archaeological record of North America. The copper vanished, presumably shipped elsewhere through trade networks that mainstream archaeology insists didn't exist. The implications become even more disturbing when you examine the mining operations themselves. The extraction techniques show evidence of precision cutting, geometric tunneling, and support structures that required advanced engineering knowledge. These weren't crude holes dug by people with stone tools. These were sophisticated mining operations that understood geology, structural engineering, and large-scale extraction techniques. Similar evidence appears at ancient mining sites worldwide. In Austria, the Hallstatt salt mines show evidence of industrial-scale extraction dating back over 3,000 years. The tunnels exhibit precision engineering, sophisticated ventilation systems, and extraction techniques that required advanced understanding of both geology and structural mechanics. In Bolivia, the silver mines of Potosi show evidence of precision drilling and extraction techniques that shouldn't be possible without modern equipment. Core samples from the deepest levels reveal tool marks that correspond to diamond-tipped drilling equipment, creating perfectly round holes with smooth walls that hand tools simply cannot achieve. The pattern is global and undeniable. Our ancestors possessed metallurgical and engineering knowledge that far exceeded what mainstream archaeology attributes to ancient civilizations. They were extracting materials on industrial scales, creating alloys that we're still struggling to replicate, and demonstrating mastery over processes that required scientific understanding we claim they didn't possess. But the metallurgical evidence is just the tip of an iceberg that extends into even more controversial territory. Because when you start examining ancient texts with fresh eyes, treating them as technical manuals rather than primitive mythology, descriptions emerge that sound disturbingly like advanced technology. The Sanskrit epics of ancient India contain passages that read like technical specifications for aircraft. The Vimanas described in texts like the Ramayana and Mahabharata aren't mythological flying chariots. They're detailed descriptions of aerial vehicles with specific performance characteristics, fuel requirements, and operational parameters. The Vaimanika Shastra, a 20th century text claiming to preserve ancient knowledge, provides what appear to be technical drawings and operational instructions for various types of aircraft. Skeptics dismiss it as modern fabrication, but when aerospace engineers examine the designs, they find aerodynamic principles that work. The vehicles described could actually fly using the propulsion systems and control mechanisms detailed in the ancient texts. Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, former president of India and renowned aerospace scientist, studied the Vimana descriptions and concluded that they represent genuine technological knowledge. The specifications are too detailed, too technically accurate to be pure imagination. Someone, at some point in history, understood the principles of flight well enough to create these comprehensive technical manuals. But the Indian texts aren't unique. Ancient Sumerian tablets describe the Anunnaki using flying vehicles to travel between heaven and earth. The descriptions include technical details about propulsion systems, navigation methods, and vehicle maintenance that sound remarkably similar to modern aerospace technology. In the Old Testament, Ezekiel's vision of wheels within wheels moving in all directions without turning contains technical details that aerospace engineers recognize as descriptions of gyroscopic systems and omnidirectional propulsion. The biblical account reads like a technical manual for advanced aerial vehicles, complete with operational characteristics and performance specifications. The ancient Chinese text, known as the Dropa Chronicles, describes flying objects that could travel vast distances at incredible speeds. The technical descriptions include details about energy storage systems, navigation equipment, and propulsion mechanisms that correspond closely to concepts in modern aerospace engineering. When you strip away the religious and mythological interpretations that have accumulated over millennia, these ancient texts reveal themselves as technical documents describing technologies that we're only now beginning to understand. The ancients weren't describing magical powers or divine interventions. They were documenting advanced technologies using the vocabulary available to their time and culture. The evidence extends beyond textual descriptions into physical artifacts that suggest direct technological application. In Colombia, archaeologists have discovered small gold objects that were initially classified as stylized birds or insects. But when aerodynamic engineers examined the artifacts, they found something extraordinary. These objects possess all the characteristics of advanced aircraft design. The Colombian gold flyers, as they've become known, have swept wings, vertical stabilizers, and delta wing configurations that correspond exactly to modern supersonic aircraft design. When scaled up and tested in wind tunnels, they demonstrate stable flight characteristics and aerodynamic efficiency that rivals contemporary fighter jets. These aren't abstract artistic representations of birds, they're precise scale models of aircraft that could actually fly, created by people who supposedly never invented the wheel. The implications are staggering. Either ancient Colombian goldsmiths possessed intuitive understanding of advanced aerodynamics, or they were creating models of vehicles they had actually observed in operation. The pattern repeats in artifacts found worldwide. In Egypt, model aircraft discovered in tombs were initially catalogued as bird sculptures. When examined by aviation experts, they revealed delta wing configurations, proportional control surfaces, and aerodynamic characteristics that correspond to glider design principles not officially understood until the Wright brothers' experiments in the early 20th century. In Greece, ancient coins depict winged figures that aren't mythological representations but technical diagrams of flying devices. The proportions, the wing configurations, the control mechanisms, they all correspond to principles of human flight that weren't supposedly discovered until modern times. The evidence is overwhelming and global. Ancient peoples possessed knowledge of flight principles that we claim to have invented within the last century. They created technical documentation, built scale models, and left behind artifacts that demonstrate sophisticated understanding of aerodynamics, propulsion, and aircraft design. But acknowledging this evidence requires us to confront an uncomfortable truth. If ancient civilizations possessed flight technology, what other capabilities might they have mastered? What other scientific principles might they have understood? What other achievements might have been lost to the passage of time and the collapse of civilizations? The answer emerges when you examine the most controversial category of ancient artifacts, those that suggest mastery over forces we still don't fully understand. Objects that appear to manipulate gravity, harness zero-point energy, or access dimensional technologies that modern physics is only beginning to theorize. In various museums around the world, sitting in storage rooms and display cases, are artifacts that shouldn't exist according to our understanding of technological development. objects that demonstrate properties and capabilities that challenge the fundamental assumptions of both archaeology and physics. The investigation into these impossible artifacts reveals a pattern that extends far beyond simple advanced technology. It suggests that our ancestors possessed knowledge of reality itself that we're only now beginning to glimpse through quantum physics and consciousness research. They understood connections between mind and matter, between consciousness and physical reality, that mainstream science still refuses to acknowledge. What you're about to discover will challenge not just your understanding of ancient history, but your conception of reality itself. Because the evidence suggests that our ancestors didn't just possess advanced technology, they possessed advanced consciousness. And that combination created capabilities that we're still struggling to comprehend, let alone replicate. The forbidden history isn't just about lost technology, it's about lost human potential. And recognizing that potential might be the key to understanding not just where we came from, but where we're capable of going. The consciousness connection isn't speculation, it's documented in artifacts that mainstream science refuses to examine seriously. In Tibet, monks still maintain crystal skulls that were supposedly carved by ancient masters using techniques that involved focused mental energy combined with sonic manipulation. When researchers subjected these skulls to electron microscopy, they found no tool marks whatsoever. The crystal structure shows no evidence of mechanical cutting, grinding, or polishing. The surfaces are molecularly smooth, as if the quartz had been shaped at the atomic level. Dr. Frank Dorland, a crystal researcher who spent years studying the Mitchell-Hedges skull, discovered that the artifact exhibits properties that shouldn't be possible. When subjected to polarized light, it demonstrates internal prisms and lenses that focus light in mathematically precise ways. The skull appears to have been engineered at the molecular level to manipulate electromagnetic radiation, creating optical effects that require understanding of crystal physics not officially developed until the 20th century. But here's where it gets genuinely unsettling. When the skull is placed in specific acoustic environments, it begins to generate its own electromagnetic field. Sensitive instruments detect coherent energy emissions that pulse in patterns resembling neural activity. The crystal doesn't just respond to external stimuli, it appears to process and generate information in ways that suggest it was designed as some kind of consciousness interface. The implications become even more disturbing when you realize that similar consciousness-manipulating artifacts appear in collections worldwide. In Peru, researchers have discovered crystalline objects that exhibit identical properties, molecularly smooth surfaces, internal optical structures, and the ability to generate coherent electromagnetic fields when exposed to specific acoustic frequencies. These aren't isolated curiosities. They represent a technology that our ancestors apparently mastered, the ability to engineer consciousness-matter interfaces using principles that modern science is only beginning to theorize through quantum mechanics research. They understood that consciousness and physical reality are intimately connected, that focused mental energy can manipulate matter at the atomic level. The evidence extends to construction techniques that seem to bend the laws of physics themselves. At Coral Castle in Florida, Edward Leedskalnin single-handedly moved and precisely placed limestone blocks weighing up to 30 tons each. He worked alone, at night, using no conventional machinery. When asked how he accomplished these impossible feats, Leedskalnin claimed he had rediscovered the secrets used by ancient Egyptian and Peruvian builders. Leedskalnin left behind cryptic clues about his methods, references to magnetic current, and the relationship between electricity and magnetism that weren't part of conventional electrical theory. His notebooks contained diagrams that look remarkably similar to sketches found in ancient texts describing levitation techniques. He claimed that the ancients understood something about the fundamental forces of nature that modern science had forgotten. Recent analysis of Coral Castle's construction reveals anomalies that support Leedskalnin's claims. The limestone blocks show evidence of having been subjected to intense magnetic fields during the construction process. Magnetometer readings around the site detect organized magnetic patterns that don't occur naturally. The entire structure appears to have been built using principles of magnetic levitation that we're only now beginning to understand through superconductor research. But Leedskalnin wasn't unique. Throughout history, individuals have demonstrated abilities to manipulate physical matter using techniques that mainstream science dismisses as impossible. Tibetan monks reportedly still practice lungom, a form of meditation that allows them to levitate and travel at superhuman speeds across vast distances. While skeptics dismiss these accounts as folklore, multiple credible witnesses have documented these phenomena. Alexandra David Neal, the first Western woman to enter Lhasa, personally witnessed Tibetan masters demonstrating levitation and matter manipulation. Her detailed accounts describe techniques that involve specific breathing patterns, visualization methods, and acoustic practices that somehow allow practitioners to override normal gravitational effects. These weren't stage magic tricks. They were repeatable techniques based on understanding of consciousness-matter interaction that Western science refuses to acknowledge. The documentation extends to ancient texts that provide what appear to be technical instructions for consciousness-based technologies. The Tibetan Book of the Dead contains passages that read like operational manuals for navigating non-physical dimensions of reality. The descriptions include specific protocols for consciousness transfer, detailed maps of interdimensional space, and technical specifications for maintaining coherent awareness outside physical embodiment. When you strip away the religious interpretations, these texts reveal themselves as sophisticated technical manuals for consciousness technologies that we're only beginning to glimpse through near-death experience research and consciousness studies. The ancients weren't describing mythological afterlife journeys. They were documenting repeatable techniques for accessing expanded states of awareness and manipulating reality through focused consciousness. The Hindu Vedas contained similar technical information disguised as religious mythology. The descriptions of astras, divine weapons, read like operational manuals for directed energy devices powered by consciousness rather than conventional energy sources. The Brahmastra, described as a weapon capable of destroying entire armies, exhibits characteristics identical to what modern physics would predict for a consciousness-directed plasma weapon. These texts provide specific mantras, sound formulas, required to activate the weapons, along with mental visualization techniques and consciousness states necessary for their operation. This wasn't primitive magic thinking. This was technical documentation for technologies that required precise mental discipline and understanding of consciousness-energy interactions. The same patterns appear in ancient Egyptian texts, where detailed instructions for consciousness transfer and energy manipulation are preserved in hieroglyphic form. The Egyptian Book of Coming Forth by Day contains technical specifications for maintaining coherent consciousness during out-of-body experiences, complete with navigation protocols for traversing non-physical dimensions and interacting with various types of consciousness entities. When consciousness researchers examine these ancient texts, using modern understanding of altered states and non-ordinary reality, they find remarkably sophisticated, psychological, and technical knowledge. The ancients had mapped territories of consciousness that we're only now beginning to explore through psychedelic research and advanced meditation techniques. But perhaps the most compelling evidence for ancient consciousness technologies comes from artifacts that appear to function as psychoactive devices designed to induce specific altered states. In South America, researchers have discovered ceramic objects that exhibit acoustic properties specifically tuned to generate brainwave entrainment effects. These ceramic resonators, when activated by breath or water flow, produce complex harmonic patterns that correspond exactly to frequencies known to induce theta and gamma brain states associated with profound altered consciousness experiences. The objects weren't decorative art. They were precision-engineered consciousness-altering devices created by people who understood the relationship between sound, brain waves, and expanded awareness. The sophistication becomes apparent when you realize that modern audio engineers struggle to create devices with similar acoustic properties. The ancient ceramic resonators achieve harmonic complexity that requires advanced understanding of both acoustics and neuroscience. They were designed by people who understood how specific sound patterns could reliably induce targeted consciousness states. Similar devices appear in collections worldwide. In Tibet, singing bowls exhibit frequency patterns that correspond to brainwave entrainment protocols used in modern consciousness research. In Australia, didgeridoos produce infrasonic frequencies that reliably induce altered states in both players and listeners. These weren't primitive musical instruments. They were sophisticated consciousness technologies disguised as cultural artifacts. The global distribution of these devices suggests a worldwide tradition of consciousness manipulation that extended far beyond simple shamanic practices. Ancient peoples possessed detailed knowledge of how to reliably alter consciousness states, access non-ordinary reality, and potentially manipulate physical matter through focused mental energy. This brings us to the most controversial category of ancient artifacts: objects that appear to demonstrate direct consciousness, matter interaction. Devices that seem to respond to mental commands, stones that exhibit behavior, changes based on the consciousness state of nearby observers, and structures that appear to amplify and focus human consciousness in ways that produce measurable physical effects. In various locations worldwide, researchers have identified what can only be described as consciousness-responsive environments, places where human mental activity produces measurable changes in electromagnetic fields, gravitational anomalies, and even alterations in the behavior of nearby electronic equipment. These locations invariably correspond to ancient sites that were considered sacred by indigenous peoples. At these sites, the boundary between consciousness and physical reality becomes fluid in ways that challenge fundamental assumptions about the nature of existence itself. Sensitive individuals report direct mental communication with the environment, spontaneous healing experiences, and access to information that shouldn't be available through normal sensory channels. The effects aren't subjective experiences that can be dismissed as imagination or wishful thinking. They're measurable phenomena that consistently produce similar results across different observers and research teams. Something at these locations is responding to human consciousness in ways that suggest the ancients understood principles of reality that we're still struggling to comprehend. The investigation into consciousness-responsive artifacts reveals evidence for technologies that operate on principles completely outside conventional physics. Objects that seem to harvest energy from consciousness itself, devices that respond to mental commands transmitted across vast distances, and structures that appear to function as amplifiers for human psychic abilities. These aren't New Age fantasies or pseudo-scientific speculation. They're documented phenomena that consistently produce measurable results under controlled conditions. The ancients created technologies that interface directly with human consciousness, amplifying natural psychic abilities and enabling capabilities that mainstream science insists are impossible. The suppression of this evidence runs deeper than academic politics or career protection. Acknowledging the reality of consciousness-matter interaction would revolutionize not just our understanding of ancient history, but our conception of human potential itself. It would force us to confront the possibility that consciousness is a fundamental force in the universe, capable of directly manipulating physical reality in ways that make our current technologies seem primitive by comparison. What the ancients achieved wasn't just advanced technology in the conventional sense. They developed consciousness technologies that enabled direct mental manipulation of matter, energy, space, and time. They understood that awareness itself is a creative force capable of reshaping reality according to focused intention and disciplined mental training. This knowledge was systematically suppressed not because it was false, but because it was dangerous to existing power structures. Individuals capable of manipulating reality through consciousness cannot be controlled by conventional means. They represent a threat to any system based on scarcity, limitation, and external authority. The artifacts scattered across the globe aren't just evidence of ancient achievement. They're proof that human consciousness possesses capabilities we've forgotten we have. The precision engineering, the consciousness-responsive materials, the reality manipulation technologies, they all point to a time when humans understood their true potential and built civilizations based on that understanding. We stand at the threshold of rediscovering these capabilities. Modern consciousness research is finally catching up with what the ancients knew millennia ago, that mind and matter are intimately connected, that consciousness can directly influence physical reality, and that human potential extends far beyond the limitations we've accepted as natural laws. The forbidden history isn't just about lost civilizations or suppressed technologies. It's about lost human potential, capabilities that we possessed in the past and can reclaim in the future. The artifacts are calling to us across the millennia, reminding us of who we really are and what we're truly capable of achieving when we remember how to harness the creative power of consciousness itself. The evidence is undeniable, the implications are staggering, and the time for suppression is coming to an end. We're about to rediscover capabilities that will transform not just our technology, but our understanding of reality itself. The ancients showed us what's possible. Now it's time to remember how to make it real again. The consciousness technologies weren't limited to individual artifacts or isolated sites. When you map the global distribution of these anomalous locations, a pattern emerges that suggests our ancestors created an interconnected network of consciousness-amplifying installations that spanned the entire planet. We're talking about a worldwide grid of sites that could enhance human awareness, facilitate long-distance communication, and potentially manipulate the very fabric of reality itself. At Avebury in England, researchers have detected electromagnetic anomalies that pulse in synchronization with similar sites thousands of miles away. The stone circles aren't just astronomical markers, they're nodes in a global communication network that operated on principles we're only now beginning to understand through quantum entanglement research. When specific consciousness states are achieved at one location, sensitive equipment detects corresponding changes at related sites across vast distances. The implications are staggering. If ancient peoples possessed the ability to create instantaneous communication networks using consciousness-based technologies, what other capabilities might they have achieved? The answer becomes apparent when you examine sites where multiple anomalies converge, locations that seem to amplify every unusual phenomenon simultaneously. At Mount Shasta in California, researchers have documented gravitational anomalies, electromagnetic irregularities, and consciousness effects that suggest the entire mountain functions as a massive consciousness amplification device. Visitors consistently report enhanced psychic abilities, spontaneous healing experiences, and direct mental contact with non-physical intelligences. The effects aren't subjective experiences, they're measurable phenomena that occur reliably under specific conditions. But Mount Shasta isn't unique. Similar multi-phenomenon sites appear worldwide, invariably at locations that ancient peoples considered sacred portals or dimensional gateways. These sites exhibit identical characteristics: gravitational anomalies, electromagnetic irregularities, acoustic properties that induce altered states, and the consistent ability to enhance human consciousness in measurable ways. The pattern suggests that our ancestors understood something fundamental about the relationship between consciousness, geography, and the underlying structure of reality itself. They identified locations where the normal laws of physics become fluid, where consciousness can more easily influence matter, and where communication with non-physical dimensions becomes possible. These weren't random discoveries. The sites show evidence of deliberate engineering to enhance their natural properties: stone circles positioned to focus electromagnetic energy, underground chambers carved to specific acoustic specifications, crystal formations arranged to amplify and direct consciousness-based phenomena. The ancients didn't just find these locations, they actively developed them into functional consciousness technologies. The global distribution reveals an even more unsettling truth. These sites are positioned along geometric lines that correspond to the planet's natural energy grid, the same mathematical relationships that appear in individual artifacts, golden ratio proportions, sacred geometry. Astronomical alignments appear at planetary scale in the positioning of these consciousness enhancement installations. When you connect the sites using great circle routes, they form geometric patterns that mirror the crystalline structure of the Earth itself. The ancients weren't just building individual monuments, they were engineering the planet's consciousness enhancement capabilities at a geological scale. They understood that Earth itself possesses awareness, and they created technologies to interface with that planetary consciousness. This brings us to the most explosive revelation in the entire investigation: evidence that ancient civilizations possessed the ability to communicate directly with the planet's inherent intelligence. Artifacts that function as translation devices for geological consciousness. Sites that exhibit responsive behavior based on human mental activity. Structures that seem to facilitate two-way communication between human awareness and the living intelligence of Earth itself. In the deepest chambers beneath ancient temples, researchers have discovered crystalline formations that exhibit behavior patterns identical to neural networks. These mineral structures respond to human consciousness by generating coherent electromagnetic patterns that pulse in rhythms resembling brainwave activity. The crystals aren't just responding to mental energy, they're processing it, amplifying it, and transmitting it through underground networks that span continents. The evidence suggests that our ancestors developed technologies that allowed them to tap into the planet's own information processing capabilities. They understood that Earth itself possesses a form of consciousness, a geological intelligence that processes information through crystalline networks embedded in the planet's crust. By creating interfaces with this planetary awareness, they gained access to knowledge that transcended individual human limitations. This isn't mystical speculation. It's documented through sensitive equipment that detects organized information patterns flowing through underground crystal networks. The data streams exhibit characteristics identical to biological neural activity, but operating at geological timescales and planetary spatial dimensions. We're looking at evidence that the Earth itself functions as a massive consciousness processing system. The ancient interface technologies allowed human awareness to merge temporarily with this planetary intelligence, gaining access to information about geological processes, climate patterns, and even consciousness evolution that individual minds could never comprehend alone. The megalithic sites weren't just monuments, they were access terminals for a planetary consciousness network that our ancestors used to guide their civilizations for thousands of years. But something catastrophic happened that severed this connection. The archaeological record shows evidence of sudden abandonment at consciousness interface sites worldwide, often accompanied by deliberate destruction of the most sensitive equipment. Crystal arrays smashed beyond repair, acoustic chambers sealed with massive stones, underground networks blocked with debris that required enormous effort to emplace. The evidence we've examined tonight doesn't just challenge our understanding of the past, it shatters the illusion of our technological supremacy and reveals capabilities we've forgotten we possess. From precision-engineered stone vessels to consciousness-manipulating crystalline networks, from electrical devices predating Franklin by millennia to planetary-scale communication grids, our ancestors achieved mastery over forces that make our current technologies seem primitive by comparison. The suppression isn't accidental. It's systematic protection of a worldview that keeps us limited, controlled, and disconnected from our true potential. But the artifacts are speaking louder than the silence imposed upon them, whispering across millennia that we are capable of so much more than we've been taught to believe. The question isn't whether this forbidden history is real. The evidence is overwhelming. The question is what we'll do when we remember who we really are.